Hi, everybody, and welcome to the fifth session of the True Colors 6 Series MiniCon. We're really excited to welcome you here today. And I think for the first time, most of our streaming is actually going really well. So I see Cheryl's already here, but I have a couple of things to do, and then we're gonna introduce Cheryl. But I just wanna remind folks that the True Colors store is open now. And so we'll be putting in the notes on Facebook and the other places how to get there. But you know that there's all of the masks in all of the different styles and colors. So you can order those. Those are on a sliding scale from $10 to $15. And then we also added this week. We added rainbow shoelaces, right? So that and they're in all different styles based on your different identities, and so they're really cool. They're what are they called, Holly? They're shoelaces. I know they're shoelaces, but this is material.
Oh, it's grow green ribbon.
It's what?
Grow green ribbon.
It's grow grain ribbon. I don't know what that is, but apparently that's what this is. And so how much are these? $8. So again, if you want to support the work that we're doing, everything that we're doing in this 6-week seminar, 6-week MiniCon series is free and open to the public, and everything is being archived on our YouTube channel. So it's all available for free. If you wanted to, purchase something from the store, or you wanted to make a donation to True Colors, if you like the information that we're providing it for no cost, we would be delighted and honored to accept your donation. So thank you very much for that. And now what I'm going to do is, it's my great delight to introduce our guest that's going to be joining us for the first part of the show today. This is Cheryl Sharp. She is, let me make sure I get this right, Cheryl. Cheryl is a deputy director at the Connecticut Human Rights and Opportunities Commission in Connecticut. She has been an activist and an advocate for civil rights for all people, including those who are LGBTQ+ for a number of years. She's a writer and a poet. She's a former member of the True Colors Board of Directors, and somebody that I've known and appreciated for many, many years. So please welcome Cheryl Sharp. Did I miss anything, Cheryl?
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I'm honored to be here with you today on this very important day, I think, for our nation as we are in a state of healing. I have done work with True Colors. I respect you and the work that you've done to help to create an opportunity for equality and fairness for LGBTQI youth and for the state of Connecticut. Today is Juneteenth, and it's an exciting day. This is a day of celebration, but it's also a day of reflection. So I'm hoping that we will get to talk about the day, the celebration and the reflection, and also some of the history. I love history, so
Great.
I'm excited to talk about all of that.
So one of the reasons that was so delighted to have, for many of the reasons that I just was delighted to have Cheryl on today, is really to talk about Juneteenth, to talk about the history of that, to talk about why it's so important and why it's so important today. So and some of you might know that there's a really huge rally going on right now, even as we speak, in Hartford, that it started at 2:00. They're just launching right now. And it's recognizing Juneteenth as a celebration, and also noticing how this is a more important year in some ways than in the past. It's not just a celebration. So let's start with Cheryl, if you want to tell us a little bit about the history of Juneteenth, and then we can talk more about what it's about for today. And I'm just going to mute myself and then come back in when you need me.
Okay, sounds great. So happy Emancipation Day, everyone, or Freedom Day. We have in our country a history of enslaving people of African descent, Black and brown people. And it was in 1865, on June 19th, that an announcement was made in one of our Confederate states, in Texas, that enslaved people were free. There has been over the years some confusion about what that means, because the Emancipation Proclamation was signed in 1863, right, by President Lincoln. And so at that point, you would say to yourself, okay, so everyone is free. But the problem is that we were still involved in the Civil War. And so even though there was this edict from the President of the United States that the Confederate states should free their enslaved people, that was not followed. And it wasn't until this announcement was made on June 19th in 1865 that the enslaved people in Texas could celebrate their freedom. And it's interesting from a historical perspective, because I want to read to you what was actually said by the Union soldiers in Galveston, Texas, when the announcement was made. It was led by Major General Gordon Granger. He came bearing this wonderful news that made it so that those that were enslaved began to sing and began to dance and began to celebrate. And some people got on their knees and thanked God, and that they were happy to be free. But I'm going to point out a few things here, because I think it is really indicative of the time that we're in now. So the pronouncement is that this involves absolute equality of rights and rights to property between former masters and slaves. So that's the announcement that's made. You're free. You are going to have absolute equal rights to property and absolute equal rights to freedom, right? So now, as a person who was enslaved, hearing that, there's this hope, because those individuals who were enslaved were providing free labor, they were being beaten, they were being dehumanized. It is a really difficult time in our history. And we want to be cognizant of what happened so it doesn't get repeated again, which is why I think the celebration of this Day of Freedom is so important as well. That was followed by an announcement that those formerly enslaved people should not leave their master's plantation, but rather they should now become laborers there. So now you're not going to provide free labor, but you are going to be paid for the labor that you're going to be providing to your former master. So when we think about what absolute equality means, what absolute freedom means, what absolute right to property means, it came with a caveat, right? That you are not going to be able to loiter, you're not going to be able to be idle, you have to do something, but you are now free. It's important to know history as well, because with that freedom, you have to think about what happened during that period of slavery. The Africans who were taken from their land and brought here were denied the right to be educated, denied the right to learn to read or write. So when we think of absolutes and absolute equality, that word has been very difficult for me. I have struggled with that word of absolute as a civil rights attorney litigating cases where individuals are claiming that they were treated differently because they belong to a protected class. Because absolute means that there's equity, right? And equity and equality are different. Equity is that you have what you need so that we're all on a level playing field. Equality is let's treat everyone the same. Well, if you weren't being treated equitably and now you're given equality or so-called equality, it's difficult to be on the same playing field and at the same point on a starting line. because you are already hindered by the circumstances that preceded you being granted this equality. So as we talk about Juneteenth and the celebrations and the eating of various foods, some of which are red to actually make us think about the blood that was shed during the time of slavery, and for us to also celebrate, for me as an African American woman, for me to celebrate the contributions that my ancestors made to this country, and for others who are Black and brown people in this country to celebrate the contributions, I think, that were made is so important, because when you look at the educational system and you look at the justice system, we have some work to be done. And I think that the way that we celebrate and not point fingers, but actually try to dismantle systemic racism and abuse of power is so important in us moving forward as a country, and as the state of Connecticut, because people think of Connecticut, right, as a progressive state, and certainly we are. But even when you look at the history of slavery in Connecticut, you see that there was a gradual, we think that slavery is bad, and we know that we need to end it, but we're going to do it gradually. So there was slavery in Connecticut up until 1848, even though there was this proposal back in the mid 1700s to end it. It wasn't until 1848 that it was actually ended in Connecticut. And then we have to look at that further. That was for people who were going to turn 25, like I think it was after the mid 1700s. But those who had already been enslaved, they remained enslaved. So I think knowing that history really is instructional when we think about where we are today with hashtag Black Lives Matter, and people's understanding of that. If you don't know history and you in your mind are like, because I've heard people say this, well, slavery ended so long ago and I don't know why we're still talking about it. All lives matter. It's not just Black Lives Matter. The Black Lives Matter movement never said that all lives don't matter, only Black Lives Matter. What was said was that at this time, when it appears that the systemic racism that permeates our society doesn't value the life of a Black person, we are asking for Black people and our allies to stand up and to agree, acknowledge, and now work towards a solution so that our lives matter, so that we don't have to be experiencing all of the pain that we are frequently experiencing with the death of unarmed Black and brown people. So while Juneteenth is a celebration, right? And it's June and the 19th, and they put it together and they came up with Juneteenth. It's a celebration across this nation and in other nations as well, just because we have allies. I don't want us to only focus on the celebratory part of it, because yes, is freedom a good thing? Yes, when it is absolute, but we're still not at absolute. Even though that pronouncement was made hundreds of years ago, we still don't have that absolute freedom. We still don't have that absolute equality. And so you joined me again, Robin. So I'm thinking you're going to jump in here and or ask me something.
No, I was waiting. You know that silence is never a strong point for me, right? So that was really, but that was really interesting and really and really good sort of framing of stuff. I was thinking, you know, when you said people think slavery ended all these hundreds of years ago, I have to say I was really transformed by the 1619 Project. From the Times, the New York Times, looking at the legacy of slavery in literally every single aspect of human life in America. And so your points about, you know, about Black Lives Matter and why we're saying Black Lives Matter and focusing on that is so important, because it hasn't been absolute freedom. One of the things you said, and I want to come back to this because I think we need to explore that a little further, but I also was intrigued when you said about, I just muted myself, the color red, and that what are some of the traditions around Juneteenth that people might not know about?
So some of the traditions are the dancing, the barbecues, the celebration of our Black history, and the contributions we've made to this society. When you look at the curriculum in schools, which I've spent a considerable time thinking about and looking at, because one of the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities, we also cover places of public accommodation, which includes schools. So we do a lot of training in the schools. And one of the things that I think is important to note is that in order to create this equity and equality that we talk about, we have to tell young people the truth about their, and that truth involves more than Black people being enslaved. It also involves the contributions that Black people have made to this society, as well as other brown people have made to this society, as well as white people have made to this society. And there needs to be this, this intersectionality is important to be discussed. And the reason why I say that is because as a young person sitting in a classroom, you need to hear what some of your successes are. You need to hear what the history is. And it's not just that you need to gather all the Black and brown children and tell them what their history is. You need to gather all children, because white students also benefit from knowing history. If we don't want history, the negative parts of it, to repeat itself, then everyone needs to be educated, everyone needs to be informed about the issue of equity and the issue of equality. Because if you feel like you have this huge piece of pie that you don't even have to think about most of the time because you're not affected by it, and you don't have to have the talk with your children because they're not being adversely affected necessarily as much as, or with the, you know, frequency of children of color. And then you're having to have really serious talks with your children that create trauma at a young age, but they have to know the information because at such an early age, you're subjected to discrimination and racism. Our curriculum needs to educate everyone so that those young people can be empowered to go into their own homes and say, you know what, this is what really happened. I know you were taught one thing, but this is what, you know, actually happened. Looking at the tradition, there's a tradition of, you know, celebrating, of dancing, of singing, of highlighting the contributions of African Americans to our community, of eating foods that are red to represent the blood that was lost, you know, red velvet cake, or other strawberries, or strawberry cake, or there's strawberry pie, and different things like that. Just again, because while we're celebrating, we're also reflecting. It's not enough to just dance and say, yes, you know, we were notified of our freedom 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed in this Confederate state. But why did that happen, and how can we prevent that type of occurrence from reoccurring as we see this ripple nationally of protest in support of Black lives and in support of us saying as a community, irrespective of our race or color or gender identity or expression or sexual orientation or any of that, that as human beings, that we have to look at people and give some value to their life. That at 12 years old, you get to play with a toy gun in the park. And the reason why is because that's what children do. If you are driving a car and you run through a stop sign and you get stopped by the police, you should still make it home, because people do that every day and they still make it home. Or if you're driving and you didn't do anything wrong and just pulled over, and someone has this unbridled anger that you don't even understand that's coming at you, that is racism, and it's a systemic racism, that we have to reflect on those things if we want them to change. And the best way to get change is to talk about these issues, discuss, to be willing to have these really difficult, uncomfortable conversations. And I think also sometimes people feel guilt, or they don't want to feel guilty. And so they want to shy away from the conversation. Healing and restoration cannot occur if you don't talk about the problem. And so also as a part of Juneteenth, you'll see a lot of discussions and conversations about race, and conversations about how we can make things better. And then you see this resurgence of energy and protest, and the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, and how Juneteenth was a part of that, and pushing the agenda of equity and equality forward. not the necessarily the agenda of, separating, because no one is saying that. Even when you hear Black Lives Matter, it's not to create a separation. It's saying, looking at our history and looking at where we stand right now, there is a lack of attention to the importance of our lives. And you need to understand, right? The George Floyd case illustrates it perfectly, because he called out for his mother, like most of us do when we're in pain. And there's something that's so cumbersome and we feel like the weight of the world is coming down on us. And he called for his mother, and rippled throughout this country was this effect of being a mother and having your child call out for you, and there's no assistance. And so we don't want in our society and in our country behavior to be normalized that is offensive and racist and discriminatory. And so we have to work at that not being normalized.
Right. That's exactly true. I think that, when he called for his mother, mothers' hearts all over the world responded. And that I think really was a turning point. And clearly, white folks are late to the table, but I'm hoping that more folks are moving forward.
Some are not. I said some white people are late to the table and others are not. We had an entire, abolitionist movement that involved white people being involved and being socially conscious and aware that the enslavement of a fellow human being was wrong, and that it was against, the morals and what this country was supposedly founded upon. So it is with us coming together and unifying, Black people, brown people, and white people, all of us coming together, those who have a conscience and know that enslaving, inequality, implicit bias has to be cured, fixed, dismantled. That's what is going to, generate this change that we need to see. And that's why I think the celebration is so important, because it is exposure and experiences with people who are not the same as you are, whether a different gender, a different sexual orientation, a different color, a different national origin. It's all of us coming together and having these shared experiences of being human beings that will, help the fear to dissipate. And it's not going to change everybody, because it's really difficult to change, grown people's hearts and minds. But we have to be willing to do it one person at a time.
Right.
And we have to have multiple people doing it one person at a time. And then that effect will mean that it will go from being one person to 10 people, to thousands of people, to millions of people who take a stand and say, it is time for justice. It is time for a change. It is time for us to embrace one another, embrace our differences, celebrate our differences, and move forward as a human race, and move forward as one, where we are going to tear down the walls that divide us and tear down systemic racism, and move forward where it's not, there's this limited piece of pie, and if you get a piece of it, that you're taking a piece of mine. That is not what we're dealing with. And I think that sometimes conceptually, that's what people think. Well, if we give you more, and it's like this ideology that you're giving something, if we give you more, that's less for us. We're asking to live. We're asking to be educated. We're asking to be able to go to the store and not be followed around. We're asking to be stopped by a police officer when we're doing something wrong and to still be able to make it home. We're asking that when we're stopped by an officer and we're not doing anything wrong, to make it home. We're asking when we go to school to not have racial slurs hurled at us. We're asking that when students are bused through a choice program, that there are not Confederate flags swinging or hanging, or students aren't holding them up in their face. We're asking that we not have a race war. That's what we're asking for. And it's not just Black and brown people who are asking for that. It is also white people who are asking for that as well. It is people who are asking for that, because people who understand a movement understand that when you say Black Lives Matter, you're not saying that all other lives don't matter. You're saying to look at the treatment of Black people by our society, historically look at it, and look at this day of celebration on June 19th in 1865, 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. Look at this celebration and look at the glee that we as a human race recognize the importance of someone who may not look like us, because we recognize our commonality, which is that we're a part of the human race. That was a long-winded answer to your question.
No, but I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. I saw a meme on Facebook that said, you know, for people that are trying to figure out the whole all lives, Black lives, you know, if you say save the whales, it doesn't mean screw the other fish. Right? It means that you're focused on, you know, the recognition that it hasn't been just or equitable or fair, or, you know, and that people have a right to a life. And
when someone says it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month, the response isn't, there are other kind of cancers. Why are we celebrating breast cancer?
Exactly, exactly. And so I think that that's really important. Somebody asked, you know, about the difference between individual and systemic racism. I think that's a fairly long conversation, and we only have a couple minutes left. So can you answer like a 2-sentence?
Yes.
Because you gave really great examples
So,
as you were talking.
So disparate treatment is difference in treatment. You're being treated differently than a similarly situated individual. And that is disparate treatment discrimination. Systemic or disparate impact is that there's this neutral policy, and it seems, you know, benign, like it's being applied to everybody, but it has a huge effect on a particular protected class, like on race and color. So you can have some systemic, system-wide, government created or government assisted policy, practice, and procedure in place that then has this effect of inequality. So when you look back at housing segregation, and you look back at restrictive covenants, and you look back at those things that created disparities in wealth, those types of systemic things that are part of our system, or you look at the way people are trained to find, you know, if you see a person of color in the store, make sure you follow them. That's where the system itself is giving instructions to those who have to follow them to treat people differently. So that's a great,
that's a great experiment. And one of the things that we'll do is on the YouTube channel, the True Colors Premier channel, we'll put up some additional resources that, you know, sort of explain the 4 eyes of oppression and some of that other stuff, and some of the information about the 1619 project and other stuff. Cheryl, thank you so much. So appreciate the depth of your understanding, your love for history, and your willingness to share it with the rest of us. So I hope that you have a wonderful Juneteenth.
Thank you very much.
And I just appreciate you so much. I'm going to share my screen for a second to show folks some information about Juneteenth in Connecticut. So here's a thing that this is I don't know if you can see it, Cheryl, but the Juneteenth Celebrate Freedom, that is the sign that's at the march in Hartford that started at 2:00. And then these are some of the events that are happening for Juneteenth, regarding Juneteenth by Connecticut organizations, that there's a community conversation with Cimora's Cultural Corner tonight from 6 to 8. There's the March for Black Justice is happening right now. There's a gala for the Amistad Center. There's open mic that's coming up at on later today as well. So there's a bunch of stuff that's happening at Cimora's Cultural Corner. The Bamboozled, I think the VAP packages are over, but the rest is still available. So check those out. There's information on the Hartford Current and other places. And it's a great opportunity to participate in a celebration and a movement for change. So thank you very much, Cheryl. I really appreciate you. And I look forward to talking with you again soon.
Of course, and the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities appreciates all of the work that you've done, and we hope to continue to partner with True Colors and the important work that you continue to do. And our website is ct.com/CHRO. For anyone who believes that they're the victim of illegal discrimination, then please contact us so that you could file a complaint of discrimination.
Okay. Great.
Good luck with the rest of your MiniCon series.
Great. Thank you so much, Cheryl.
Thank you.
See you later.
Okay, bye.
So we have a bunch of folks in the waiting room. So I'm just right now, Maria is connecting. She just came in. Maria is runs our event planning, some of our community liaison stuff. She's doing some donor development. And so she is the person who's going to manage this next piece, which is really looking at what's going on in the legislative and legal rights arena. And so I'm going to invite the panel in, and Maria, if you want to introduce them. So I'm going to invite people in, and then I'm going to back out so it's just y'all. Okay, so here comes Carly. Webb is coming in. Asaf Orr from the National Center for Lesbian Rights is coming in, and Eva and Alyssa are coming in. So we'll just wait for them to all come into the room, and then I am going to mute myself.
All right, so we'll get started and we'll just talk about some introductions. Asaf Orr is the Senior Staff Attorney and Transgender Youth Project Director for the National Center for Lesbian Rights. Asaf works to safeguard the rights of transgender and gender expansive youth. And so I'm very excited to speak with you. We also have Alyssa Gold and Eva Gold. What a beautiful smile. Eva is a 14-year-old 8th grader who has spoken out a lot on transgender issues. And so I'm very interested to hear from her. And Alyssa is mom. She is the mother of a vivacious 14-year-old transgender daughter. She's an advocate for equality locally and on a state level, and has even started her own pride celebration in her town. So very excited to speak to you too, ladies. And then Carly Webb is a contributor to outsports.com and a freelance television producer reporter who has been in sports journalism for 25 years. She is also a very competitive athlete, runner, cyclist. I can't keep up with her. So we're very excited to speak with all of you. So let's get started, Asaf, with you. Can you talk about some of the recent legal issues regarding trans health, and what are we looking at in Connecticut specifically?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for having me. I think the biggest development, obviously, is the Supreme Court's decision on Monday in Bostock. You know, although that case is interpreting Title VII, which is a federal anti-discrimination law that applies to employment, really what the Supreme Court was doing in that case is interpreting what is the scope of sex discrimination under federal law. And you know what we know is that sex discrimination is touched by many different federal laws, including Title IX, which affects young people in schools, as well as Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act, which is the non-discrimination provision that prohibits discrimination in healthcare settings and insurance on a wide range of bases, including sex. And so that's really the really major development. Obviously, folks may also remember that just last Friday, the Department of Health and Human Services released their final regulations on Section 1557, really undoing the regulations that the Obama administration had put in place just as that administration was ending. And what the Bostock decision does is basically pulls the rug out from under those regulations. There was never really any good basis for having them, and there was significant arguments for preventing any court from giving them any deference or any weight in court. But now with the Bostock decision, there's really nothing left. Those regulations are not yet final, so it's certainly possible that the Secretary of Health and Human Services withdraws the regulations before August when they go into effect. But as I indicated, if the federal government doesn't do that, there will certainly be the courts ultimately have the final say, and they'll get to interpret the law, and there'll be plenty of opportunity for them to say exactly what I just said, which is that those regulations are contrary to the law and therefore can't be followed.
Interesting. Can you speak to what might be going on in Connecticut? We have 3 Connecticut students suing transgender athletes. That started in February. So what's going on with that? Do you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think, what's happened with that is that in addition to the federal court case that's going on in the federal district court in Connecticut, those 3 athletes also filed a complaint with the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, asking them to investigate the Connecticut school districts and the CIAC. And recently, I think just a few weeks ago, the Department of Education issued what's called a letter of findings, which is basically, we've concluded our investigation and we find, in this case, they found that the Connecticut school districts violated Title IX. Now that decision is entirely based on this misconception that trans people aren't covered under the definition of sex, which the Supreme Court on Monday entirely rejected. So much like the regulations issued by the Department of Health and Human Services, there's really no basis. There wasn't before when they initially issued the letter of findings, and there certainly is none now, now that the Supreme Court has made clear that trans people are covered under sex discrimination. That's not to say that the Alliance Defending Freedom is not going to continue to pursue this litigation. They can do that, but we remain confident as ever that the federal court will recognize that trans kids are protected under Title IX, just like all other kids, and that the trans inclusive policy that CIAC has does not violate Title IX or any other legal protections for non-transgender student athletes.
Interesting. Carly, I'd like to go to you and find out some of your experiences and get your take on what's happening in Connecticut. Sounds like maybe Carly's on mute.
No, I'm not on mute.
Oh, there you are.
It's good. It's good to see you. And first off, just to talk about just welcome everybody on a beautiful Juneteenth. But let's also have a reminder as we celebrate this Juneteenth that in this country right now, 5 nooses had people attached to them in the last 7 days. Strange fruit strange fruit has not gone away. And in fact, in many ways in 2020, regrettably to say, it's back. So let's keep that in mind as we celebrate this Juneteenth. As far as the situation with trans athletes, today, the Department of Injustice, ran by the Trump administration, once again rang in on a case in a different state. They rang in on the matter of HB 500, and they said that HB 500 in Idaho does not fall under Bostock. Now, it's bogus. I know it's bogus. It's the exact same thing they did in Connecticut. And I'll remind you that law that was passed in Idaho is the first law that was passed by a state government in this country that's directly said that trans student athletes would be banned from competition, which is the first domino on the way to taking away all sorts of rights for our community. Now, as far as Connecticut goes, simply put, it's exactly what Asaf is saying. The ADF now really knows that they're really defending a losing position. But if this is the hill they want to die on, they want to die on it. And I also add that the Connecticut Republican Party is also planning on dying on that hill, because remember, right after this lawsuit was filed, the Connecticut Republicans were organizing a fundraiser to give the 3 athletes who are suing a Courage Award. They still have plans to do that, and they're still raising money by demonizing Connecticut kids. Now, let that sink in for a second, everyone. The state Republican Party is picking on kids, trans kids specifically, to raise campaign cash. Now, I want everybody to think about that, not only right now, but as you start heading into November, really think about how far that the other side's going to go to make discrimination legal in this country. Now, as far as my own experiences as a competitive athlete, they've largely been good ones. I have had a lot of solid support from training partners, from friends, from other role models out in the community who actually came before me and compete. I can think of one who's now an elected official in this state. And I can tell you overall, it's been good, but it can be better. I'm really concerned about what's happening to young people, and I really feel that this is an opportunity for Connecticut, even out of this difficult situation, to lead the way and set a template for the country on how they deal with it and how we deal with matters of equality. And in many ways, Connecticut has led the way. The human rights laws in this state that extended the protections have been on the books since 2011. And those laws, as awkward as they may have been at the beginning, are working. They're working. I say, let them continue to work. And and if we need to tweak them, then let's tweak them together. But let's start from the focus of inclusion, not exclusion. And that's the thing that the Alliance Defending Freedom and the Trump administration have never understood, and apparently they don't want to understand. Let's go from a point of inclusion and work from there. All human rights begin at that point.
And so we do have a young person with us. Eva, I'd love to hear from you. What I know you've been very active in state politics. So if you can share a little bit of your experience and what's going on for you right now.
Go. We can talk about last. Let's go.
I mean, I don't think yet that I've had that bad of an experience overall yet. So, in Ridgefield, there have been some. Oh, well,
go. Just go.
Where we're from, there have been some not good things happen, but we have had people on our side helping us, and they've been solved, but it has taken a few years. And now hearing about trans kids not being able to play their sport or anything, I think it's sad, really. I mean, our country is supposed to be a safe place for everyone, and over the last few years, it's just become a place where it's not safe at all, and no one's equal.
Alyssa, where are you on this? What are your recent outreaches to political leaders and the legislative branch? What is your advocacy looking like these days?
All over it. So, I try and reach out on a extremely regular basis whenever there's anything that pertains to us. And I generally reach out to our local legislators as well as Curry as well, because he really heads up a lot of what's going on in the state with regard to LGBTQ. I reach out to Robin because you guys are very active, and to Asaf, and as well as to GLAD because Jennifer Leva has been great. And so really just trying to find, I'm part of a progressive organization. So we did kind of like a tweet storm thing regarding Lamont's initial reaction to the athletes, which thank goodness he corrected. I'm hoping he just misspoke, but I still haven't seen a retraction. Generally he's an ally of the LGBTQ population, but with regard to his response on the trans athletes, it was, basically throwing them under the bus for money. But later in the day, when the ruling came out with regard to, the finding with regard to healthcare, he corrected it. So, so I'm part of a group, and we try and get the word out to let people know how they can communicate with their legislators. I got calls back from at least 4 legislators, right away within minutes of letting them know what had happened with regard to Lamont's original statement and his second statement. And, and in our town, our first selectman is reached out as well. I had sent him a message and he reached out to our legislators as well. And I definitely try to look over and propose different agenda items for the year, which sadly this year kind of got sidelined. But But that's kind of where things are. And on a national level, I reach out on an extremely regular basis to our representatives. So to let them know where we are and how we feel about things. And, you know, it's really important because the idea of, like, God forbid, you know, this awful thing goes through with the healthcare. We spoke out about it last year at, you know, at the Blumenthal and Office of the Healthcare Advocate press conference, because it's really important. I mean, you heard stories. There were people there, other trans people who spoke besides Ava. And some of them had experiences that I fear, like, God forbid, Ava has a car accident and the EMT shows up and realizes, oh, she's trans. She can just wait till the next EMT comes. She could be dead, you know, and it's awful. And she also, and it pertains not only to trans care or LGBTQ care. And the reason why it impacts trans a little more is because if, for example, you have a car accident or your insurance doesn't match, you know, and you can physically tell, you know, you can't always tell that someone is gay, but sometimes you can tell that a trans person is trans. So that's why it impacts them slightly more. And it's a very scary prospect because it impacts everything. And then the insurance aspect as well, you know, the hormones, blockers, gender confirmation surgery, while it may seem to people on the outside as it's an option, it's actually not. It's a medical necessity to ensure my child's well-being and that she is here as well. And I would also say as well, what's going on all aspects of life, you know, like you look at housing, our representatives, thank goodness, in Connecticut are very supportive. And I think it was Murphy who put out a chart yesterday with all the different aspects of life, well, just some major ones, and, you know, checked off this latest one for work, but there's still healthcare, housing, schools, you know, and there were a couple others in there. And even if you look at what's going on with schools right now and Title IX under Betsy DeVos, they've instructed the Office of Civil Rights, because we worked with them, they've instructed them to kind of, I wouldn't say lose, but put it at the very bottom of the pile and don't deal with anything that has to do with transgender people. And, you know, while Ava's, you know, doing okay right now, she was bullied daily for 2 years to the point where it was really not good, let's just say. And we had to take advantage of our rights. And people nowadays, if they encounter the same thing, won't be able to do that under the Trump administration, because that's still standing right now to informally bury anything tied to, you know, discrimination or bullying and harassment of transgender students.
Interesting.
So.
Well, I'd like to go back to you, Carly, and find out, you know, what are the next steps for Connecticut? You know, we have a parent and child here in Connecticut. And so what are the next steps for athletes and trans people and health? Where are we going?
Where we need to go is really one place. First and foremost, we need to be out in the streets. We need to be prepared so that if a Ned Lamont caves again, and let's be real, he did, even though I do give a lot of credit to our Connecticut congressional delegation and to 22 other members of Congress who went straight up to the Department of Education, the Department of Justice, and said, we stand in the gap against what you're doing. We, the people of this state, the people who believe in human rights, the people who believe in freedom, we need to be prepared to hit the streets. We need to be prepared to agitate. The best disinfectant is sunlight. We need to continue to put sunlight on what's happening, keep people aware and informed, even during these times, and even now more than ever, not just on the issue of athletes, but healthcare affects all of us. I mean, even if whether you're gay, whether you're cis, trans, gay, straight, healthcare affects all of us. And if they can deny me healthcare, they can get on the road to deny you health care. Remember what they've tried to do ever since Donald Trump took the oath of office. They have gone after the ACA. They've gone after health care for all. They will continue to attack it and continue to attack it. And all going after trans people is, whether it's athletes in a school, kids in a school, or in healthcare, it's considered a cheap mission kill to the cheap labor conservatives. And that's what this is really about. This thing with athletes, for example, this is not about athletes. This is about the wholesale erasure of trans people in particular, but also in a larger sense, all LGBTQ people in society. Read the position papers of groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom, of the Family Research Council, of so-called focus on the family. You don't really, I can tell you, James Dobson's not focused on my family or your family, but read their position papers and really understand what they're for. They don't deny it. In a single position paper, it's interesting. They say they want to fight for Title IX. They've been trying to kill it since Title IX was passed in 1972. They've been trying to kill gay rights for 50 years. They've tried to kill civil rights even longer than that, and they don't deny it. So I tell people our next step is in the streets, in the State House, on Capitol Hill, in their faces. Agitation gets the clothes clean, and Betsy DeVos has 3 years of dirty laundry she has to account for.
Asaf, I'd like to go back to you and find out, what might be the national trends of trans healthcare, trans athlete issues. What are we looking at coming forward? I know we have an election coming up in November. Thank goodness.
I think that, national trends are generally good, right? I think with Bostock behind us and a win for the LGBT community, we can now confidently say, without really reservation, say that any sex discrimination statute that exists in federal law now also covers LGBT people, right? Without, full stop. So Title IX covers trans people, the Affordable Care Act, the Fair Housing Act, any sex discrimination statute that's out there covers LGBT people. And so I think, Alyssa, you were talking about the Office for Civil Rights. I think a lot of that slowdown is, one, Betsy DeVos didn't want to do it, but also two, their interpretation was that Title IX didn't cover LGBT kids. And now it very clearly does. And so it's going to be a lot harder for her to, keep slowing down those cases, because the reality is for a lot of families, instead of going to OCR, they can go straight into court. And I think in terms of trends, what we saw after the Obama administration released its 2016 guidance on trans kids in schools, after the Affordable Care Act regulations came out, we saw an even further shift than we had seen even leading up to those releases, right? That once we hit that initial point where school districts said, oh, well, we have to allow trans kids to use the restrooms consistent with their gender identity, there wasn't a whole lot of backpedaling in 2017. There were some school districts that, jumped at the opportunity to backpedal, but most didn't, because, like Carly said, it's been working, right? They had all these fears about what it meant to have trans kids use the correct restrooms or locker rooms or whatever. None of them came to pass. They're like, this is actually not that hard to implement. And so they just kept doing it. Likewise, in the healthcare context, insurance companies realized that with the Obama era regulations under the Affordable Care Act, they can't really maintain exclusions for transition-related care unless they've got a good reason for it. And because they didn't have any, they started eliminating exclusions left and right. And they haven't come back. There are still, that's not to say there aren't exclusions out there, there are. And we're sort of continuing the effort to fight those and have courts find that they're unlawful, but there are far fewer exclusions than there were in the past. So I think trends, are continuing to kind of move towards inclusion, as Carly talked about. And lastly, I know we don't have a whole lot of time left, but with sports, Connecticut is one of, I think, 19 states or jurisdictions that allow trans kids to compete consistent with gender identity. Now, Connecticut, among a number of others, is the more liberal state. But there's South Dakota, there's North Carolina, there's Virginia, there's Florida. There are many other states in conservative parts of the country that have these trans inclusive policies, and they've been working. They've been working actually since 2008, when Washington became the first state to have such a policy. And I think courts are going to see that. And so we're just going to continue to move forward and progress. That's not to say there aren't going to be some back steps here and there, but we will continue to move forward.
But Maria, at the same time, let's not be complacent. Remember what they did in Idaho. They snuck this through and rammed this through in the middle of a global pandemic. Even with the hope, let's see the reality. From Key West, Florida to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, this nation is no trans land. Let's understand fully that, for example, when I drive home to visit my parents in Omaha, Nebraska, the majority of that drive is through areas where I have no rights by which this nation says they're bound to respect. This nation for trans people cannot continue to exist half slave, half free. It is time to bring this nation as a whole into this century. And we have to hit the streets and continue to agitate until it does.
Yeah. I'd like to, Alyssa, do you have something to say?
Yeah, it's really important that everybody gets out and votes, not just on a national level, but also for your state legislature. Because in Connecticut, thank goodness, we have some rules and some laws so that we are protected. That's what they're trying to overturn in Connecticut, that Connecticut protects trans athletes and trans students right now. And they're going to be doing the census, get people to do the census, because they're going to be drawing the lines for the next 10 years. So, and also talk to and write to your legislators about coming back to session and to Lamont to do a special session so we can have absentee ballot expansion so that we can all vote safely during this tough time of COVID. So let's not forget, Republicans are the ones who are opposing voting for all. Not only do they not want trans rights, and they're also doing the fundraisers, like Carly had mentioned, but they're also opposing access to safe and easy voting for people across our nation.
Now, it's interesting you brought up the census, because I have a non-binary child, and I couldn't list them as a non-binary citizen. I was not given that option. I was given male or female, and that was not given to me and not given to them. So that's something that maybe a future discussion about the census. But I'd love to have the last word be from Ava. If you'd like to share with us what's next for you, honey, and just how you're feeling right now about what's going on in Connecticut.
I mean, what's happening in Connecticut, I think it's definitely louder. It's not really the best what's happening. I am working with my mom and other people to make sure people get the right to vote by being in home and absentee ballot. That way we can all vote for what we believe in and hopefully get this country that fell apart back together.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Asaf and Ava and Alyssa and Carly. Really interesting conversation today. Really interesting movements nationally and in Connecticut. So we'll turn it back to you, Robin.
Great, thank you very much. I'm really grateful to the panel. Thank you. I just have to ask you, you're headed off to high school. What's your greatest hope for high school?
Actually being able to go. Also, joining the soccer team. I've been playing soccer since I was in kindergarten, and it's always been a big part of my life, and I really enjoy it. So
great, thank you.
Actually, the team she played with, Jazz, had fought actually a couple months before when Ava transitioned and wanted to play with the girls team, and Jazz had won that. We found out just like a couple months right before, so that soccer league across the country let trans people play on the team with the gender they identify with.
Right. That is so great. All right. Well, thank you all. Have a great rest of your afternoon. I really appreciate everything you had to say. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Maria. So I am delighted now to welcome to our 5th week of streaming the one, the only Kai Davis. I have to say, I want to do her bio. And Kai, you know, the sad part, one of the many sad parts about not being able to do the conference, you know, live, was that Kai was going to be the keynote for Saturday, and I was really disappointed that this that we weren't able to do this. But so in Kai's own words, Kai is a Black queer writer, performer, and teaching artist from Philadelphia. Kai received her BA in both Africana studies and English with a concentration in creative writing from Temple University. Her work explores Blackness, queerness, womanhood, and the many ways these identities converge. Kai's work examines how power operates globally, nationally, interpersonally, and internally. She speaks on structural racism, misogyny, Black womanhood, ancestral trauma, mental health, intersectionality, queer love, Black love, and more. And what better day to have her on our show than Juneteenth. So welcome, Kai.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just really, really glad that this is even able to happen, and that we found ways to make this work in the midst of all that's going on. I want to start off this Juneteenth by saying the names of some Black women, cis women and trans women, who have been murdered by both police and civilians. And then I want to have a brief moment of silence to just reflect on the gravity of their loss. Breonna Taylor, Maya Hall, Remy Fells, Raya Milton, India Kager, Corinne Gaines, Nina Pop, Rekia Boyd, Renisha McBride, and countless others. Thank you, and happy Juneteenth. I want to start with some joy. This poem is kind of untitled. It was the outro for a good friend of mine's album called The Moment. Yeah, her name is Yanni Mo. It's on Spotify and iTunes. You can look it up. But right now, I'm just calling this poem the Baby Girl outro. So here we go. Baby girl, I hope the city smile on you. I hope they erect a steel bridge and unfurl 20 miles of highway for you. I hope the thunder booms and claps out a Black rainbow for you. And I hope it rains a hot, sweet brown liquor on you. Baby girl, I hope your mama good to you. Baby girl, I hope them checks got your name on them. I want your skin a soft Georgia clay. Baby girl, I hope something blooms for you. I hope you jump high enough to be mourning. Baby girl, I hope these people are listening. Hope these people ain't asking for a lot when you ain't got a pot to piss in. I hope the hate is hot. I hope there's no more funerals. I hope the angels looking down on you. And I hope the baby's looking up to you. I hope you slick oil on scalp and your kinks coil for you, baby girl. I hope your baby texts you first. I hope her love smooths out every knot in your back for you. Baby girl, I hope you're comfortable in the quiet. I hope your love fills all the cracks in the wall until the walls crack and they fall. Baby girl, I hope this isn't only a moment. Baby girl, I want this eternal. I want your past, present, and future to converge under this lavender sky. I want the soft grass pressing against your soles. I want the roots to remind you that Black girls rise from the dirt too. Baby girl, I want soft things for you. Baby girl, I want you to know that you deserve it. Baby girl, I want you to know that you earned it. Thank you. And that's the first poem.
I love that. Thank you. So great.
I feel like Juneteenth being such a big conversation right now in conjunction with it being Pride Month is really important and a good opportunity to talk about how queer people, Black queer people have gone overlooked in the movement while being leaders of this movement. And a lot of those Black queer people are women, and a lot of them are Black trans women. And I think that in the midst of all of this turmoil and also all of this revolution happening, there is, I think, a sense of guilt that marginalized people feel for maybe not being up to march in the streets, or not having the emotional capacity to engage with Twitter and do the organizing, because we've so often been victims of the violence that we're protesting against, and having to encounter and confront hateful rhetoric on a daily basis is hard enough, and to have it happen as a reaction to an uprising is even harder. And so I wrote, this next poem is called Apathy is Guilt. And I wrote it at it was at an event for the African American Policy Forum. And I was there to perform another poem of mine, Ain't I a Woman? And there were all these mothers of the movement, mothers of women who had been killed due to police violence. And I felt so guilty that I did not know a lot of their daughters' names and hadn't heard their stories. And I had to sort of sit and like parse through what that meant and why I hadn't engaged, and why it was easier to stand up for straight Black men in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement than it was to stand up for women who looked like me, who dressed like me, who acted like me. So that's the intro to this next poem. Apathy is Guilt. Apathy is guilt. Another sister's name to forget. I tell myself I don't have space in my throat for another name, but I do. America hands me a Black boy's name and tells me to repeat it loud, and I do. Now a Black man can't say I don't love him. Look at all these Black boys crawling out my throat. The more names I say, the better the echo, the prettier the song. I say India Kager, and it is flat and awkward. I learned Black girls should go quietly. But brothers Ben knew that. Know the revolution always came in fragments, that Black women, being Black women, will drag their ragged bones through the dirt to flatten a lovely even path, or sneak a loophole in a Black man's noose, even if he don't deserve salvation. And there will always be a woman who doesn't call the police on her boyfriend because she's seen what happened to her cousin. So she climbs inside her own lungs, says her own name, faces the dogs and gunfire in her own house, marches in her own kitchen, swallows her own body, then swallows her own body again. When a Black man says we too full of ourselves, that's what they mean. Our lives worth less than our sons, and they all know that. I know that. But I be tired by the time I'm through praying my knees raw for a boy who does not love me. And I be tired by the time I'm through saying my own name. Every Black woman I know got her hands full or tied for the sake of someone else. And you could look us all in the eye and say, ain't y'all finna do something about it? And we might suck our teeth or sigh, say, I just got a lot on my plate right now. And watch another sister go, then go missing. Guilty of it, but not ashamed. Thank you. That was Apathy is Guilt.
Wow, that was amazing.
Thank you so
No
much.
words. Wow. Wow.
Thank you. It's just a lot of tension in this time. And there's like a desperation for joy, for healing, that I think most of us have not experienced in our lifetime, especially in the time of COVID-19, and having marginalized people be further isolated. I want to tell a story of when I was in college. It was my sophomore year, and I was in an English class with a tenured professor. And so if you know anything about tenured professors, is a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times they've sort of not necessarily given up, but sort of have an arrogance about the fact that, you know, they're not getting fired anytime soon. And so I had this one professor who was, you know, probably baby boomer age, white woman. And she was teaching a short story that used the N-word a whole bunch. And I asked her, you know, the problem really wasn't that the story used the N-word. That was a problem in and of itself, but that wasn't the problem. The problem was that she kept using the slur even when we weren't reading from the text. So I politely asked her if she could maybe not say the slur, and she responded very, very aggressively, telling me that she can say whatever she wants in her classroom, and that if I don't like it, I can get out, that she marched with Dr. Martin Luther King, and I don't even know what the history of the word, and I can't deny it because I don't know the history, but she does because she was there in the civil rights movement. It was all just nonsense. And, but it was just so deflating, especially because this happened during the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement. And Darren Wilson, I think, was just acquitted. And so it just carried a lot of weight with it to be feeling so alone in that space. I ended up leaving. And I'll tell a story about what happened next after the poem. But I think that was the first time I realized how much identity and mental health coincide. And being consistently and constantly traumatized is not normal. And it has real world effects on people, especially for young people. And so I want to give a content warning for suicidal ideation for this piece. It's called Unrevolutionary Suicide. When the weight of hundreds of years of rhetoric come thundering through your room, rip the mantle to ruins, the foundation you stand on loosens to the point of crumbling, all you can do is, there's a space between my skin and the air that screams, grating and coarse, screams red-eyed and shaking. And there are people much paler than me, shrugging and hailing cabs and getting job interviews. Sometimes I choose not to speak. Sometimes the professor tosses the word nigger in the wind and I'm expected not to point it out. Being Black, being queer, being woman, being other means gripping at your esophagus with hard nails, and yanking shut means don't cry until you get home. There is a unique kind of sadness that comes with being hated without reason, that comes when hate turns into cloak, into lover, into a rational decision to make. People will tell you to grow the hell up, take a joke, let it go like a 2x4 bashing against your shins. People tell you that all these slurs don't mean what they mean when they suck the blood out of your cheeks. There are days we wake up and then we recoil at our mistake. Not all suicides are revolutionary. Most happen when the want and the need are no longer familiar with each other, when the space between your skin and air lengthens until the earth feels distant, until you realize this world is not yours, that millions of years have transpired and you are still waiting for a breath of fresh air, looking at slideshows in history class full of dead bodies that look like yours, nooses around throats that spoke like yours. The time for breaking becomes now, the time for building has passed, and somehow, in some twisted way, this is the best you'll ever feel about living. I want there to be a happy ending for this. Some rise to action, leather boots and picket signs, but right now, there is only the lead in my stomach from each time I bit the bullet. There are people on this planet so bright and shiny who held the pens and the swords too, and then expect me to not be bitter. There are people who will hear this poem and cringe, then scoff, then walk away. I'm still standing here, sifting through the rubble, stumbling on the stones. Thank you.
My God, that was so powerful. I'm just going to put in this for you to see some of what the listeners have been saying. Things like, wow, powerful, beautiful, drop the mic, applause, applause.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate y'all. And honestly, it's, you know, I say this over and over again, like none of this is easy. None of this is normal. And that means that that's true for me as well. And I've definitely struggled. But the reason I like to tell this story is because after I left the classroom, one of my friends found me. I was crying on the campus. He's a straight, cis, white dude. And he went up to me and he was like, yo, that was wild what happened with the professor. What can we do? And I was just like, I don't even know. I feel exhausted by this. I don't feel capable of dealing with it right now. And he was just like, bet, I got you. He ended up emailing everybody in the class. They created a thread where they had a conversation about what happened. Then when I came to class, because it was required, when I came back to class the next Thursday or whatever, they said that we're not going to have class until we talk about what happened. I didn't have to say anything. And I was the only Black person, and I believe one of only maybe 2 queer people in the course. And they confronted her, they had the conversation. It got to the point where she was like crying and upset and ashamed, which she should have been for the way that she behaved in the situation. And that gave me hope. In that moment when I wrote that poem, I did not have that. I didn't know that I had that community around me that was willing to stand up and use their privilege and use their power in that way. And I'm forever grateful for that, because that's what allyship is supposed to look like. That's what an accomplice is supposed to do. And it gave me room going through college and dealing with this, to lean in to my community and really focus on what it means to be healthy. And I want to do 2 more poems. This next poem I wrote right after I graduated college. And it was the first time I realized that I was doing okay. And I suffered from depression and anxiety for a really long time. And I had decided to finally submit myself to therapy. And I was going to therapy, and then I started taking medication for my depression. And I feel like there's still a lot of stigma around around medication as not a legitimate form of wellness because it's chemicals. But you take insulin if you have diabetes, and my brain was off. I needed help. And I made a step towards my wellness that was really, really important for my survival. And I had a moment where I was just like, wow, I feel good. And I wanted to be present in it because I feel like so often, especially as artists and writers, we tend to delve into the depths of our sadness and our torment, and are not ever really nearly as present in our joy. And so this poem is called Better. This is the part where the trap music comes on and I don't fall into a shallow hole, where the bed is made and the sheets are clean and my ears stop ringing. When my friends ask where I've been and I say anywhere, but they welcome me back tight into a warm chest, where I sing at the mirror and kiss my own reflection. I mean, this is a new door. I mean, a happy funeral. This is a new and ripe tomato, a new autumn wind tugging me back tight into a warm chest. I mean, this is a new excuse to cry, a new posture, a new laughter. My therapist says, congratulations, my ex is still furious. My coffee has sugar and so do my mornings, please. It took me so long to get here. The quiet in my stomach had wrung me dry, and this is new rain. The first time every day does not feel like an emergency. I sleep in and do not answer your calls for a new reason. I brush my teeth before bed. Nah, I'm chilling. None of my dreams are nightmares. My hair is uncoiling and I still look pretty. I am the god of my own blood. I command my veins to keep ringing. I mean, this is me better. I'm better. I'm good. I'm good. Thank you.
Oh my God, the smile on my face through that entire one. I thought my face was going to crack open. So great. That was
the joy is important. Even though it's not constant, trying to remain present in it as a form of self-care has really been really helpful for me. And just trying to explore. And I know that there's been conversations around spirituality. My partner is Muslim, and I've been practicing praying with her, and that connection has been really, really powerful. And just forever using this time that we really can't avoid to do whatever we can to connect to ourselves and to the world is really beautiful. And this next and last poem is a poem that brought me joy to write. And it was funny because it was commissioned and I had no intention of writing this poem. But I went on a hike with a friend and I realized how connected we all were, and how important that is, especially now, to have that connection not only to each other, but to the earth, and to all of the feelings that are floating around in the air. Right now, this poem is called Get Around. A bird sings and brings about a longing, sugars the air, and we remember the world, bright, beckoning, and wanting for more music. What is a song but an invitation to fill a void, to interrupt the stiff and bitter air with some small sweetness? If I say yes, will you say yes back? If I press my lips together, can we hum through this earth, make space where it was once taken, write our names where we were once nameless? We plaster ourselves across the sky and end where we begin, sugar ourselves into any jubilant and welcoming sound. I want a joy so fat honey flows out our laugh and fills the cracks in the pavement. I want a joy so loud that windows fly open to let in the good noise. I mean that being is a celebration, I mean that movement is a ritual. I mean that we are water, wind, sun, that we can be felt, but not held in a fist. I mean that home is a feeling, is a feeling, is a feeling. And if you find yourself afraid to sing, then you are not home. And if your friend doesn't call you family, then you are two strangers. And if a stranger does not call you friend, then the music is somewhere else. But we will find it and dance until the floorboards buckle, until the walls are dewy with our blessed sweat, until the birds come flocking to the sugar at our feet. I say, the day is always ripe, and we are always worthy. Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
There we go. I unmuted myself. Thank you so much. This was just absolutely incredibly, fabulously wonderful.
Thank you.
So tell folks how, didn't you just write a book?
Yes, I have a collection of poems out that's available on my website.
And what's your website for people?
KaiDavisPoetry.com. The book is entitled Ain't I? It's a collection of poems that I would like to call, I guess, my hits, things that I most likely do at sets. So a lot of these poems are included in that. But it's mostly about my experience as a Black woman and how all of those identities that I occupy intersect.
Wow, that's great. So it's KaiDavisPoetry.com.
Yes.
That's wonderful. So, and Holly, my wife, is putting it in the comments so that people can make sure that they get it. So thank you so much for joining us today. I can't tell you how much you touched me and everybody that was listening to you, and just, thank you. That's all I just thank you.
Thank you for inviting me and allowing me to contribute to this wonderful project that you have going on.
Thank you. And then hopefully if the conference is able to be a face-to-face thing next year, we'll bring it back next year.
I would love that.
Attention. That's all right. Thank you so much, Kai. Have a great rest of your afternoon. And I hope we get a chance to talk again soon. And everybody, buy her book.
Yes.
She pronouns, yes, you said. I saw it.
Yes.
Pronouns, yes. Okay. All right. Buy her book.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a
Bye.
great.
All right. I'm going to be bringing Ray Petit into the room. He's connecting right now. And he's going to be moderating the next panel of folks. And that one of the things that seems like it's really important especially for right now, was to have the ability to figure out how to take care of ourselves in the midst of everything that's happening. So Ray, I don't actually, there you are. Are you actually on yet, Ray?
I am.
Okay, great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to down and turn it over to Ray to introduce the panel and to hi everybody. Just want to say hi to everybody. Hi Tony.
Hi.
Oh, hi Diane. Okay. And I'm listening. I'm trying to take myself out of the picture.
Bye.
Thank you, Robin, and hello, everyone.
Hey.
We have a wonderful wellness panel. Just brief introductions. We have Diane Ferrucci. Diane is a nurse educator at the University of Hartford. Diane is also a Reiki master and a teacher and a certified wellness coach. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have Tony Berlio. Tony is known as a compassionate and empowering life and a motivating and thought-provoking trainer. Since 2005, Tony has provided trainings to over 30,000 people around the world. Tony has dedicated himself to both promoting competent and respectful healthcare for the transgender community by educating providers and advocating on the behalf of patients. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you.
Next, we have Nicole Mayweather Banks, who is a psychotherapist at Beehive Counseling and Wellness in Manchester, Connecticut. She counsels with passion for empowering individuals to overcome challenges. Nicole is committed to providing both gender-affirming therapy and advocacy for the trans and gender non-conforming community. Nicole utilizes best practices to enhance coping skills that encourages sustainable personal growth. In addition, she provides a welcoming and safe space for clients to confidentially share experiences while working together towards their goals. Welcome, Nicole. And next we have, last but certainly not least, we have Nathaniel Black, who is also a Reiki master and a True Colors mentor and a long-term advocate for human rights and self-care. My name is Ray Petit. I'm a mentoring coordinator at True Colors, and we're just talking a little bit about wellness. This will be a rather simple panel. We generally have 3 questions and would love to be able to hear from your professional experience on what things may help us when we're dealing with health. And most of these questions will be taken from a bit of the contradiction that comes with wanting and needing to help others, but also needing to take care of and benefit ourselves. As we talk about that, at least in the current social climate, we can't ignore technology. And for many of us, we have to be abreast of everything that's going on in the news, whether it's listening to NPR, reading a news report, or Facebook feed. We both need to be informed, and yet we understand the detriments when we're not able to push pause on those news outlets or information coming in, or take a brief fast. Would you be able to talk a little bit from each person about the balance that's needed with technology, both to stay informed, but also to take mental health?
Do we roll a die to see who goes first?
No particular
You go
order.
first.
Yep.
I can go. Diane,
Tony?
you're muted. That's why I didn't know if you were going to go. Okay. I think it's really important that we balance ourselves and we make it when all this started, the pandemic started, I could not stop watching the news, and I kept saying to myself every day, don't watch it. But we're drawn to that. We're especially in a climate where we didn't know what was going to happen the next second of our lives, which is really, really scary. So when we don't know and we go to the place of, oh my God, we start writing those stories of doom. That's when anxiety and all everything else that comes along with that, starts playing in our minds. So I have to shut off the TV and walk away. And it took me probably the first month to be able to do that. And I think that we have to also be kind to ourselves when we're practicing and starting to do something like that. Like, we can't beat ourselves up when we still sit down and watch the TV. But it was a very scary time, I can say, for the community that I serve, transgender youth and their families. But we just kept them in the moment as much as possible. So I think it's really important that as people, for myself, taking care of that community, that I also make it very, very clear that I take care of myself, because there is such a thing as compassion fatigue, as probably most of you know.
That's great. And understanding that might be a bit of a process for us. Thank you, Tony.
Yeah.
Diane?
Yes, I was introduced to a new term within the last couple of weeks called doom scrolling, which is when you just get sucked into Twitter and you are just scrolling and getting more and more anxious and depressed. So yes, you need to set limits on the TV, but also on social media, because while that can be a great source of information that might not be making it to the mainstream news, it can also be overwhelming to the point that then you're not able to offer anything of yourself to help anyone. The metaphor I often use with my students, whether they're nursing students or Reiki students, is the same as when you get on a plane and they give you that spiel at the beginning. If the masks pop down because the plane is becoming depressurized, you put your own mask on first. then you can help somebody else. Because if you pass out, you're not going to be able to help them. And you're one more person who then needs to be rescued. So having that self-care and setting those limits, yes, we want to be informed. We want to know what's going on so that we can help ourselves, our families, our communities. But if you don't set some limits on that so that it doesn't become toxic, then you'll find yourself in that place where you just aren't able to help anyone.
And I love that you said it can become toxic. It can be emotionally immobilizing. Nate?
I really appreciate everything everyone said already. I kind of just wanted to put out there that from my own experience, I've learned if I try to help from a place of lacking, so if I'm tired or even if I'm hungry, just if I haven't done the basic things to take care of myself, I am significantly more likely to cause more harm than anything else. And I think especially when we're dealing with situations that are so emotionally raw, helping and hurting can become very gray lines, just in terms of, I mean, I know I communicate a lot more aggressively when I haven't cared for myself. So even just those basic things, we really can't, if I have not taken the time to take care of myself today, I cannot confidently say that I'm going to go into that situation and make it any better. I'm probably not thinking clearly. I think we can very much underestimate the effect that these sort of things can have on our bodies and our mental states and our ability to think clearly. So yeah, that's just my input.
Thank you. Thank you. Nicole, I'm not sure you might have went out for a little bit. We're still talking about.
I think I'm back. I think I'm here.
All
I
right.
had to practice some of my mindfulness techniques and my woo stuff in the middle.
We're still talking about the paradox between needing to use technology, but also needing to distance ourselves from it at times for self-care.
Right. So for me, I have been out of the loop on a lot of things that have been happening. Me being a therapist, I spend a lot of time on virtual. So when it's not time for me to work, I kind of try to really detach myself. What ended up happening though is that I detached myself so much I kind of got lost in what was going on and had to reintegrate myself into my social media just to kind of keep up with what was going on in the world and learn a way to kind of find a balance so that I wasn't out of the loop, but I wasn't so completely enmeshed in what was going on that it was affecting my everyday, day-to-day life. So what I do now is I make sure that I make time to actually go on and look for what I want to specifically look for in the news, but I don't overwhelm myself with the information.
And I hear you saying that intentionality is key there, and maybe having some ideal of limits when you go on.
Yes. I think in the world that we're and everything that that's going on today, intentionality is important. Because everything is so up in the air and we don't know what's going to happen. So it's very important that we're intentional on everything that we're trying to do, every move that we're making, especially with us having to take so many precautions with COVID, so many precautions these days, just walking down the street. Everything has to be intentional. The paths you take, the stores you go into, the routes you go into the grocery store. So that is really, I think, an important word right now, is just being intentional about everything that we do.
Sure. And the next question is really a follow-up to that, really considering the social climate, everything that's going on. I think we can all agree that it is a heavy emotional time, a lot to process. The reason why we get into fields like this is because we have giant hearts, but it also means that we have a large capacity to feel and have that empathy. Tony, you brought up compassion fatigue that was, I think, coined in the 1960s, originally used, and Can we talk a little bit about that? The desire and the need for individuals to sort of reach out and be there on the front lines, but also to put our own mask on, and how do we find that balance?
Absolutely. It is a balance. I cannot show up as the coach and the mindfulness instructor if I am losing my own mind, if I'm not in the moment. I've learned this, I've been doing this work for years, and I learned it very early on that if I didn't rejuvenate my energy, and I was only giving out energy, that I was go down on a downward spiral. And I'll be full transparency here. 3 years ago, I wasn't taking care of myself, and things were really happening a lot with the people that I serve. And I was up at psych hospitals with kids who were attempted suicide almost every week. And I burnt out, and my blood pressure went sky high. I had to go to the emergency room. I actually had to take a year off of coaching. And then I started studying mindfulness and realizing that when I show up for my client, that I'm there with them in the moment, but when I leave, I need to leave everything. And I was carrying all that with me. So now I take care of myself. I have a weekly self-care thing. I mean, it's a little different now since the COVID, but I used to do massage, sushi, and shoe shopping. I mean, that was my thing. And what's really, people don't realize what self-care is, that sometimes self-care is something that we kind of do on a normal basis. So when you're doing it for self-care, you need to announce it. If anybody follows me on Facebook, I always say Self-Care Saturday, and I let everybody know that today I'm taking care of myself. And that really, really helps.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. And I appreciate the transparency, as well as we seek to answer this, just hear from others. I as well was an individual who used self-care and massage to often do self-care. All of that sort of changed in the era of COVID. So if we could maybe even talk about some practical examples as we hear from others to answer that as well.
I think I can chime in on this one. I feel, for me, the way that I look at self-care, and I really had to put in perspective and be more intentional about it. If you go back to think about what you think about oxygen masks, you have to put yours on before you are to help anybody else, because if you're down, then you can't go and you can't help anyone else. You can't pour from an empty cup. So I learned that it was really important for me to help and continue to have myself build up in order for me to be able to help other people. It wasn't always so simple, but I've learned to kind of take those little moments. I've learned to actually utilize those commercials that come on TV, those calm commercials that say for 30 seconds, don't do anything. And then my wife knows that when that 30 seconds comes, we're quiet. We're just going to take that second. And that's at least my minute that someone else is going to give me if I don't take it for myself. I've also picked up on gardening. I've learned that kind of keeping moving and keeping active and doing things have been really beneficial for me. Working with my hands has been really good, because when you work with your hands, you have to really be focused on what you're doing. It also gives me a sense of control when I feel like don't have any control. If I'm building something, or if I'm making something, I'm able to kind of choose which direction it's going to go in. If I'm going to add, if I'm going to take away, just really being able to give myself some control around what's going on in my everyday, in my day-to-day life. I try to do things like stay connected with my family, even when I don't feel like leaving the house. I'll go out and I'll go to try to at least see my family. It's really right now we're not seeing clients inside the office, because of everything that's going on with COVID. But we are offering sessions outside, and we do walk and talk sessions outside at the park. There are days where I don't want to walk 5 sessions in a row, but I know that going outside and getting that sunshine and getting that air is beneficial to my own mental health, but also beneficial to the mental health of my clients, because it's good for them to be able to get out and socialize and have that face-to-face interaction, which is another plus. And just really trying to stay in touch with individuals, even in the midst of social distancing, trying to figure out a way to still stay connected to the outside world. I feel like a really big piece of just trying to be, just remaining aware of the signs and symptoms that may be happening. If you're struggling, just paying attention to like behaviors in your own actions, changes in your own body, just being more intentional about focusing on what's going on with yourself, changes in your emotions, changes in your thinking, being really aware of your own mental health is really important to self-care.
Yeah, I love that, and love those examples. And really just to kind of focus in on how when we do take that time, it helps center us in the present and gives us something that we can control when everything may be out of control. Diane, Nathan?
You all are saying such wonderful stuff, and it's making my brain go everywhere. Ray, could you please remind me of exactly what the question was?
Yeah, really just dealing with the paradox of compassion fatigue, that we have such huge hearts, and for many of us, we need to be out there helping, and yet we also need to take care of ourselves, and just dealing with that balance.
Yeah. The word flexibility is coming to mind. Flexibility, and so I think we're all in this really weird place right now where this has been going on for a while. I mean, you can look at my head and see that I have not since February, okay? I think when these things become extended, it can be very easy to forget that we are all still actively dealing with an extreme situation that is having all kinds of ripple effects for everybody. So being compassionate about that. I recently heard somebody say they were beating themselves up about how they were performing at work, and said something along the lines of, I didn't think working from home would be this hard. From home is not this hard. I can tell you this as someone who's worked from home for the last 3 years. It has been significantly harder. We are not working from home. We're trying to survive a pandemic from home, which might include working. Something that's really helped me is, and this kind of piggybacks on the last question, I'm as addicted to Facebook as anybody, but just not, there's something really powerful about this not being the first thing I turn to in the morning. I have an extensive morning routine, probably more so than a lot of people do, but I'll do 45 minutes of yoga and an hour of meditating before taking that thing off airplane mode, and facing the day. But just, I once heard somebody explain meditating as just the time to get it all out so you can go on with your day. I think a lot of us have a lot to get out. Which also just brings me to the point of give yourself the opportunity to feel your feelings. I handle extreme situations pretty well, or at least I like to think so. So when this all first happened, Nate went into, okay, I've got this mode. I could only hold that for so long. And after a while, I really had to sit and come to a realization that I was scared, that I was tired, that I was frustrated, just everything that I have been maybe keeping out on the fringes. I spent a few minutes the other night before bed and just sort of screamed into my pillow. And I have to say, I feel a lot better today. So there's a lot of validity there to just accepting however it is you're dealing with this extreme situation.
And I love, Nate, that you also mentioned the concept of routine. I think when astronauts get ready to deal with extreme social isolation, one of the things they tell them is to make sure that you practice that routine, that you have one when you rise and when you go to sleep, and to make sure that that's sort of functional so you can keep that sort of normative, even if the situation is not. Diane, do you have any thoughts?
Yes, and I think the routine is definitely a big piece of it. I know when all of this shift first happened back in March, my initial thought was, okay, so how do I need to change my routine to work with this? And it took me about 2 days to realize I need to not change my routine to work with this. Because we are creatures of habit. And if I wasn't using my usual morning routine that includes some yoga, some meditation, and some other pieces, then my day just did not feel right. And it's hilarious that I'm saying it this week when I have overslept almost every single day and have barely ever gotten my routine completely in. But so I have this sort of tiered system in my head. Okay, this is my ideal. This will be my morning routine. This will be my kind of average. And if absolutely nothing else, I will at least get this much in because there's got to be at least something to fill my cup so that I can be able to pour it out. And so I found having those levels, because it does hit you very differently on different days. And primal scream therapy, yes, that is a thing that can be very helpful. And there are some days that you're there, and there are some days that you're not. And just having to be a little flexible within the routine you've created for yourself so that you can be kind to yourself in taking care of yourself.
Yeah. I hear you saying it's so important that we have that, but even more important that we give ourselves grace and know that it may fluctuate from day to day or on a weekly basis. Yeah. And I think that's. Mm-hmm.
Right. No, I just wanted to add to that. So I think kind of going back to the term intentional and really thinking about how these, when you're looking to change your routine, there's usually some type of warning. So where you have time to kind of practice it and think about it and hear. But with this situation that we're in now, there was no warning. So, it takes about, 30 days to kind of either do or undo a habit. So when you're getting to okay, well, I'm going to change my routine, trying to change your routine at the last minute, but still trying to, change work routines and then trying to educate your children from home. You did not go to school for education. So that is not very fun. In the midst of everything, it's even more difficult. And then with everything being such an uproar, by the time you get something established, then there's a shift because things are open.
Nicole lost her audio.
Okay. Sorry, Nicole, we lost you a bit there on audio.
Oh, I lost audio again.
And just filling up, I think we've all sort of brought out some salient points. The last conundrum I really want to deal with is just this. I often describe it as, for those who may be workaholics, we can work every day. We need to make sure that we can fit the most into that millisecond, and the next one is just important. And then finally, sometimes when we do take a break, or that needed self-care that we're talking about for our own wellness, there's the guilt that's associated with it. And I have to be working. I'm not productive. I'm not valuable. I'm not meaningful. How do we deal with that? The need for self-care, but dealing with the guilt, really, of taking that time.
If I can, I'll keep my therapist in business for probably another 30 years with that one. It's very hard, but I know I have to do it. And I get exactly the way you just mentioned. I'm laying on my couch watching TV and I'm like, what am I doing? I should be working on this. I should be doing this. I should be reaching out to that person. I didn't make an appointment with that person yet. I literally have to take my phone, put it somewhere else, and remind myself that I deserve this. And that, I think, self-care is really important, that we are kind to ourselves and we remind ourselves that this is something that we just don't deserve, we need, right? And what I try to do is shift that thought, because when you change your thought, your emotion changes and your actions change. It happens organically, right? But the guilt is there, and I struggle with that almost every time I try to, if I'm just laying down relaxing. If I'm intentional and I say, okay, I'm going to go walk to the beach and come back, I'm not thinking about that. I have to be busy. You know, I'm an artist. If I'm outside painting, that's another thing I do for self-care. I'm not thinking about that. But when I'm laying on the couch, like watching TV, which I don't do too often. But when I do, it's like, oh my God, I should be doing something else. So yeah, thank God for my therapist. She's awesome.
I love that. An ability to be able to catch that thought in a moment, Tony, and switch it. Yeah.
Living in the moment. It's awesome.
Any others?
I'm not sure if there was a different question. I kind of lost audio. Are we still on the question? Are we on?
Yeah, the last conundrum, the last paradox we're dealing with is the need for self-care, but also the guilt that's associated with it. And how do we deal with that guilt and pass through it? Yeah.
I'm in there. I got a story for you. So actually, I just experienced this past weekend that just passed. The past weekend that just passed was my younger sister's birthday, and also it was a short amount of time after my mom had just gotten out of surgery, and I had not seen her yet. But everything in me said I cannot wake up in my house the next day. I need to go. I need to be somewhere else over a lake. So I had to make the decision to say, like, I'm going to take care of me right now. This is what I need. And my sister will still be there when I get back, and my mom will still be there when I get back. But there was a lot of guilt on the fact that this is my sister's birthday and this is her day to celebrate. And at the same time, you know, my mom is home and, you know, she's having health issues. But I also did understand that there were other people who would be there to help my mom at that time. And at this point in time, I needed to take care of myself. So I woke up that morning and said to my wife, like, we need to go. We need to go away for the weekend. And we took a 4-day weekend. And it was the best thing. It was the best decision that I made. And then I was able to come back and, you know, everything's all well and I'm going to go see them today. But had I let that guilt overtake me, then I would not have taken that vacation and I would still be stuck in the same mental space and, you know, still have that fatigue that I had previously. So I was able to kind of come back rejuvenated and to restart and prepare for my other sister's birthday, who's today.
That's a great example, Nicole. And we just have a few more minutes. Are there any other thoughts about that, sort of overcoming that guilt, dealing with that paradox?
Yeah, one of the things I kind of like to or have to do sometimes is flip the script. If a patient told me that they were having a hard time feeling guilty, that they were taking the time they needed to do whatever they needed to be doing because they weren't being productive, what would I say to them? I would say you're worth it. You're not just worth what you create. And that's something that our society has kind of trained us to believe, where we get into this sort of toxic productivity mindset. If I am not producing X amount of whatever, then I am not valuable. But that's not true. People are valuable just for being human. But it's always harder to apply that to ourselves. So I try to think about what I would say to another person who was in that place, which is, no, you're just valuable because you exist and you're a human being. So yes, you are allowed to do what you need to do to take care of yourself. And then, oh yeah, okay, I guess I need to do that too.
Well, this has certainly been a wonderful reminder that we're valuable in and of ourselves, and we have the right to just exist and to be. And as much as we need allies, we need you not only in this present moment, but tomorrow and next week, which means that we have to practice wellness and self-care. Tony, thank you so much. Nathan, Nicole, and Diane, thanks for being on.
Thank you, everybody. That was great. Thank you so much. So we're just about out of time. It's just 4 o'clock now. So I just want to give you a quick heads up. Don't forget that that you can get the shoelaces, you can get the masks. That's in the notes. For next week, we're going to be doing a celebration of queer culture. And so there's a bunch of folks who are going to be on next week, including Jason Rodriguez, who is from Pose. He's the choreographer for Pose. He plays Lamar Abundance. And he's also Slim Ninja in his drag life. ChibiCon will be joining us. The Hartford Gay Men's Chorus will be joining us. So it'll be a really great celebration of queer culture. I think we also even have a youth open mic. So check it out next week. Thank you to our panel, and thank you to everybody who watched today. It was great having you. Ray, thanks for moderating, and bye everybody. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Happy Juneteenth.
Happy Juneteenth.
Happy Juneteenth.
Thank you. Mm.